Repeating conditions to determine reliability is replication, the type of sequence of conditions in a study to draw conclusions. Experimental design. List of descriptions of skills and the conditions under which they should be observed. Behavioral checklist. Synonymous with ABAB designs, withdrawal designs. Three-phase design that begins with a treatment condition. BAB design. Sequence. The subject's behavior is a result of exposure to prior condition is a sequence effect. Systematic process for identifying the purpose of challenging behaviors is a functional behavior assessment. A statement about the predicted outcome is a prediction. A presumed but unobserved process is a hypothetical construct. Experimental design, where participants choose between options based on distinct cues and reinforcement. Concurrent chain design. Behavior change by environmental variables independent of the other people. Automatic contingency. 1 to 2 short sessions are conducted for each condition. Free functional analysis. Experimental design to compare 2 or more conditions. Multi-element design. Improvements based on opportunity to perform. Practice effect. A FA variation designed to increase efficiency. Interview informed synthesize contingency. A variety of experimental designs that use baseline logic. Single case design. A single verbal response is a function of more than one variable. Convergent multiple control. The truth of a statement depends on how effectively it guides action. Pragmatism. Vocal response evoked by a vocal verbal SD with formal similarity. Echoic. Verbal behavior with formal similarity under the control of a verbal SD. Duplic. Belief of integration to maximum amount. Normalization. Assumption that the world is lawful and orderly. Determinism. A response evoked by a nonverbal discriminative stimulus. Tact. A verbal SD evokes a specific nonverbal behavior. Listener discrimination. Written response evoked by a verbal SD. Copying text. A response of any form evoked by an MO and followed by a specific reinforcer is a MAND. Multiple baseline design applied to different behaviors of the same subject. Multiple baselines across behaviors. Interview rating scales or questionnaires used to identify the maintaining reinforcer of problem behavior. Interact functional assessment. A spoken verbal stimulus that evokes a written, typed, or finger-spelled response. Taking dictation. The philosophy of the science of behavior is behaviorism. AFA where conditions occur during naturally occurring opportunities of trial-based functional analysis. A discrimination in which a verbal stimulus alters the function of another stimulus. Verbal conditional discrimination. A hypothetical variable that falsely claims to explain the observed phenomena. Explanatory fiction. Variations of a multiple baseline with intermittent checks. Multiple probe design. Assessment that acknowledges complex interrelations between environment and a behavior is the ecological assessment. Experimental designs with changing successive criteria for reinforcement for punishment. Changing criteria designed continually questioning truth and validity of science. Philosophical doubt. Target behaviors are appropriate and intervention procedures are acceptable as social validity. Behavior that produces covariation and other untrained behaviors. Pivotal behavior. Members of a response class based on the common effect on the environment. Function-based definition. Defining behavior by shape, form, topography-based definition. Data points that do not consistently fall within a narrow range. Variable baseline. Covert events accessible only to first and private events. Experimental technique that demonstrates the effects of reinforcement. DRI, DRA, reversal technique. Verbal response is under the control of a verbal stimulus with point-to-point correspondence with no formal similarity. Codec. 2 or more verbal SDs that each independently evoke behavior, but when combined evoke a specific response. Compound verbal discrimination. Multiple baseline designs apply to different participants. Multiple baselines across subjects. Antecedent and response share the same sense and mode and resemble each other's formal similarity. The degree to which a study's findings have generality, external validity. Behaviorism that understands the human behavior, including private events. Radical behaviorism. Repeatedly implementing a condition to reduce extraneous variables. Steady state strategy. Ruling out simple before moving to more complex explanations. Parsimony. Multiple baseline designs apply to different locations, multiple baselines across settings. A systematic approach of the understanding of a natural science phenomena is science. The prior level of responding cannot be reproduced as irreversibility. Someone who engages in verbal behavior is a speaker. Response evoked by a verbal SD with no point-to-point correspondence is an introverbal. A duplicate where the form of a motor response is under the control of a visual verbal SD with formal similarity. Motor imitation. Person who reinforces the speaker behavior listener. Controlled comparison of the deviant under the IV is experiment. Data that is not trending upward or downward is stable baseline. A philosophical approach that views behavioral events that cannot be observed as outside the realm of science. Methodological behaviorism. Natural science approach to the study of behavior. Experimental analysis of behavior. The observation affecting the behavior being measured is reactivity. Using reversal logic to compare the effects of two or more conditions. Multiple treatment reversal design. Only behaviors likely to produce naturally occurring reinforcement should be targeted. Relevance of behavior rule. Variations where baseline and or intervention start and other legs are staggered. Delayed multiple probe design. Delayed multiple baseline design. Each session of the FA is terminated when problem behavior occurs. Latency-based functional analysis. Higher order verbal cusp, combining speaker and listener repertoires. Bidirectional naming. Objective observation of phenomena is empiricism. Exchanging the reinforcement contingencies for two different responses. Contingency reversal. Interaction between a speaker and a listener. Verbal episode. A single antecedent variable affects the strength of more than one response. Divergent multiple control. Experimental design with baseline intervention baseline. ABA design. Repeating conditions in an experiment to determine effects. Replication. Demonstration of a functional relation between environmental variables and behavior is a functional analysis. A tact that occurs as a result of stimulus generalization. Tact extension. A response evoked by a written verbal SD with no form of similarity, but there is point sexual. Likelihood that the target behavior will occur in each circumstance. Conditional probability. A behavior that exposes the learner to new environments. Behavioral cusp. Verbal behavior where the listener is affected by a specific response topography from the speaker. Topography based. Serving the same function. Functionally equivalent. Indirect and direct procedures to identify and define the target behaviors of behavioral assessment. Recording the extent to which a behavior occurs more often at some time than others. Scatterplot recording. Experimental arrangements of antecedents and consequence. A functional analysis. Two interlocking levels of verbal behavior in one utterance. Autoclitic. A tuning behavior is attributed to only the manipulated event. A functional relation. Experiment to determine the effects of different amounts of the independent variable. Parametric analysis. Behavior whose reinforcer is mediated by a listener is verbal behavior. A single compound evokes a non-matching interverbal response. Simple verbal discrimination. Behavior change that has maximum impact on access to reinforcers is habilitation. Recording a descriptive temporally sequenced account of behaviors, antecedents, and consequences is anecdotal observation. Direct observation of antecedent behavior consequences in the natural environment. Descriptive functional behavior assessment. Five different types of verbal behavior. Elementary verbal operant. Experimental design that alternates conditions to verify previous effects. Reversal design. Systematic process for identifying the purpose of challenging behavior. Functional behavior assessment. The subject behavior is the result of exposure to prior condition. Sequence effect. Three-phase design that begins with the treatment condition. BAB design. Synonymous with the ABAB design, a withdrawal design. List of descriptions of skills and the conditions under which they should be observed. Behavioral checklist. The type of sequence conditions in a study to draw conclusions. Experimental design.